Hey there gamers, it's been a little while since I did a Nolt board update, so I thought it'd be super fun to scroll through the Nolt board and see some of the dev responses, and also what some of you guys think about the current balance patch and state of the game. But that being said, let's get started with Please Surprise Us with Aether stages. This poster says, please 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 add the Bowser's Castle layout from Project M. So for the most fun part, it's pretty necessary. The Aether team are platform fighter fans just like the rest of us, and have their fair share of fun stages that they really enjoyed in those games. Whether they're from Smash, fan games, and other original plat fighters. Rivals 1 had some Aether stages inspired by those stages as well, so we're in good hands for fun stages coming to the game. But I still feel like I need to share that Rivals 2 is in a brand new engine, and I'm hoping there's greater emphasis on expanding the layouts and technical aspects of the Aether stages, even if they're not in the first wave of Aether stages. We see their slopes in Rivals 2, and some of the target test stages, so I'm hoping we can see new elements like that in Aether stages. Having a new camera also means that we have a big stage with slopes and different areas to fight in like Temple, transforming layouts and segments like Pokemon Stadium, Delphina Plaza, and Halberd, and I'll even make the bold claim of saying a giant stage like the Great Cave Offensive with some segments on the map getting closed off, or the player getting instantly KO'd would be neat. I'm sure there's other iconic map designs the devs would like to make their own versions of, probably entirely original ideas too. But I think it'd be cool for the player base to have moments like, whoa, Rivals 1 couldn't do this before, just to see how far the devs have made it. And of course, please add the Bowser's Castle layout from Project M. This is Bowser's Castle from Project M, by the way. I love this stage so much, it's one of my favorites in the game, which I'm very surprised that other platform fighters don't have stages like this, because I rock with it heavy. But I think other cool stages like this would be super sick to see. I am a big Temple fan, and I'm a big Silphco fan. I'm not a 1-net fan, sadly those cars always hit me, and I die to them. So I do think that seeing these would be super cool, and Dan said, we'll surprise you by making them all unsurprising, which is unfortunate, but I think it's very fun to have Aether stages on the way nonetheless, and I'm curious what you guys think the Aether stages will look like in the future. Replace Orcane's side B with Bouncy Fish. Orcane's side B is a pretty terrible move. Throughout the game, it's been too good for recovery, but terrible in basically every other use, until now, where it's terrible for both. My proposal is to replace it with Shake Bouncing Fish, which also fits thematically. Bouncing Fish would give Orcane new ways to kill and open up new combo routes, while also making its recovery not as strong as before or as bad as it is now. The way I would balance it would be no pratfall, but quite a bit of wall jump cancelable and lag, meaning Orcane doesn't die if he misses, but cannot continue as an edge guard. The ending is wall jump cancelable in order to not mess with Orcane's recovery too much. On hit, Orcane could do a little flip back, and have it restored, so that way you can edge guard Orcane by purposely jumping in the way. Also, a possible puddle variant could be making an AoE water splash when it hits the ground or reaches the end of the move. I think all of this sounds super sick. Personally, as an Orcane player, I feel like side B has always been very, very strong or very weak in Rivals 2. In Rivals 1, it seems to have a nice middle ground because there's no ledges, but in Rivals 2, it's definitely not super tailored for the engine, and it is also one of those moves where it feels like there's one use and it's just the recovery, whereas most other characters have multiple uses for each of their moves. Edalus responds though and says, Orcane is already perfect, and by definition we can't make something more perfect. In all seriousness though, Orcane will continue to receive balance changes like the rest of the cast, but the not planned is in reference to the title, that we don't have any plans to swap his side special for Bouncing Fish. I do wonder if this is one of the moves that they do want to rework down the road, because I know in the past they have talked about how they're not happy with each character's kit 100%, and they do want to rework a few things, especially before they put out the character tutorials. So I wonder if this is something that they are looking at, just not this idea specifically. I do like this idea. I think that it would nicely replace what Orcane has and give him more depth. However, I'm not sure if he necessarily needs that. I'm sure we could play around with the balance a little bit more and find a nicer middle ground for Orcane side B, because right now it's far from good, it's pretty bad, but in the past it's been very good, so I'm sure we could get something going on, you know? Keeping this discussion rolling just a little bit longer, this poster says, change Orcane side B to a different move. Orcane side B is a relic of old Rivals, where moves were a lot less multifaceted, but unlike Zetterburn down B, it has received basically no love. Orcane side B is the only movement side B with no real offensive niche. There is basically no scenario where the move is better than just playing normally, and Puddle barely fixes this because the Puddle empowered side B is frame 43. I've seen a few people, they'll like fish for this move like off stage, and it's really cool whenever it lands, but that's more of like a montage type thing, like I'm looking for a clip than real gameplay, you know? The trade-off was that it was probably the strongest for recovery. But now that that sucks, so what's the point? It also kept the previous nerfs that have no real reason to exist due to the lack of iframes. Simply put, the move should be changed to be a move better for offense but worse for recovery. A cool idea would be bouncing fish, but basically anything but what the move is currently would be a lot better. Also, no one would be sad about side B because no one plays Orcane for side B. It's a move you have to use, but you never really want to. I do agree with all these points. I think the general balance direction of Orcane recently has confused me a little bit, and I'd like to make a video on it soon. I want to see like if there's a few tweaks, like in the past like Fleet got some movement nerfs and then they got like partially reverted. I'm curious if we'll see something like that soon. But Orcane's direction is very weird to me because it feels like they want to remove offensive tools from his kit and aggression and reward him for using bubbles, right? But bubbles are not necessarily the most fun part of Orcane's kit. Like, sure, they're good to use, like if bubbles were terrible, Orcane probably wouldn't be that fun. But currently, bubbles feel maybe too good, and then other parts of his kit feel not good enough, like side B and his recovery notably. So I'm curious to see where we go from here. Hey gamer, so sorry to jump in here and interrupt the video. I just want to remind you that it would be super appreciated if you used code LASTSTOCK in the Rivals shop. It really helps my channel a ton and helps my free weekly Wi-Fi events. As well as checking out the description, I've got 2 videos coming up soon that are both talking about who's your favorite character to play and giving tips for each character. If you have any feedback on that and you want to share some fun little tips and tricks with your Bane, or you feel really strongly about how much you hate fighting Clarin, you might want to check out those forums and have your feedback and tips included in those upcoming videos. Thanks tons, and let's get back to the video. Moving away from Orcane and the game's balance for just a minute, let players gift items to friends. This is a feature a lot of live service games have, and I'd love to give some skins and palettes to friends. I would personally really like to do this for viewers, because sometimes I'll do skin giveaways, and then I have to send a viewer a code, and sometimes I get the code from a friend, like let's say, if they go and buy it for me, right, and they give it to me as a gift, and then I pass it on to one of you guys. I don't know if that code works all the time, and there's not a way for me to check it, so I think gifting would smooth this out. George says, we think this is a great feature too. It's not currently on our roadmap, but we'll take a look at how we can fit it in, since it's a lot of work and not compatible with our current backend. This means it probably will show up like maybe in the far future, maybe not, but it's not coming anytime soon, and I think that's okay because, I mean, gifting's not a core gameplay element, you know? Next up, critical hit effects are really needed. Can we have a critical hit effect that just flashes our benevolent game creator's face? The legendary Dan Frenacy, I really need this please. It should be of course epic quality in the store, it would be critical to the game's success. And down here Dan says, I like the critical to the game's success pun. We have been talking about adding a green screen critical hit, and maybe you can make it a point at a file in your local PC so it would be customizable, but only client side. That way, you could put whatever picture you want. I'd have to talk to our programming team about how possible this would be and if it would break anything. I think that even if the devs don't do this, this is something you could definitely add into the game with Workshop, and I think that would be a little bit crazy. But this actually sounds like a lot of fun. I feel like something that I appreciate the Rivals team about is that they seem like they're down to have more fun, and they're not quite as strict as maybe some other dev studios are. Next up, for more gameplay minigame type features, we have the infinite eye break mode. It would be nice to be able to play eye break without the 1 minute time limit, just to zone out and practice movement in an intentional way. And Dan says they're discussing options. I think it's a good idea for sure, but would require some UI solutions on how the user decides between the different settings. I sent the idea over to Walls on our team, and we'll see if he can sneak it in between his work on the advanced tutorials. I think this would be really cool if you could just maybe set a timer or something like that. I don't mind the 1 minute, but truthfully these little mini game modes definitely could benefit from having like a non-stop, like just playing so you get bored type feature, you know, instead of putting you on that little timer. For a suggestion that I really like that relates to gameplay, however, we have Sounds Cue to differentiate projectiles versus normal parry. This would help a ton, recognizing whether the opponent is in parry stun when there's a lot of VFX clutter. So imagine like if an opponent parries Zetterburn Fireball right, Zetterburn doesn't go into stun, right? However, something like Orcane Puddle does put Orcane into stun, or even something like Orcane F Strong, right? Then, Edelus just changed it to discussing options. I think overall this would be really cool. I like the parry sound effect, it's very like nice and like bubbly sounding, almost like fun, like it feels good to hit a parry. The same way it feels cool to like hit a headshot in like a shooter game, right? but if there was maybe like a more crisp sound for if you actually put your opponent in stun, and then the more fun poppy sound for if your opponent reflected a projectile, I think that would fit pretty well. I would like that a lot. Next up, for our last dev response, we have outlines are useless if the color isn't customizable. The fills and customizable outline thickness being added was a step in the right direction, but again, still very useless if you cannot change the color of the outlines and fills. Can we just at least have color presets? I'm not asking for full hex codes of colors, I just want to be able to change the outlines to white. In my last post, I mainly asked to have customizable colors for the outlines and the current fills, and make the characters the colors of the outlines, which are green, orange, pink, purple, maroon, and blue. Only blue is slightly visible because the hue chosen perfectly blends in with the stages that have a lot of blues and purples, such as Merchant Port or Tempest Peak. I tried using the patterns, but it gave me a migraine, so I couldn't do that option. I'm begging for useful colorblindness settings at this point. I'll do it for free, I'm a programmer, I just want to play the game I love offline. Looping back to some balance discussion, this post is pretty long, but I think it's pretty insightful, and I like talking about Forsburn since he hasn't had a lot of tweaks in a pretty long time. This poster says, Forsburn still feels like he's in beta. Some of the stuff got fixed, yippee, thank you devs, that was added in an edit, I assume. There are a ton of bits of jank and inconsistency there that are small, but come together to make Forsburn feel very underbaked compared to the polish of the rest of the cast. For the sake of not flooding the board with a million reports, I'm going to list them all here. The number one most important issue, Clone is extremely stupid. The most pressing issue is that it kills itself consistently, especially on Air Armada and Hyperborean Harbor. But this is fairly obvious and a well-known issue. A more subtle, but almost equally damning problem is the fact that Clone is really bad at actually following its target. It constantly runs way past the opponent, or goes into slow run turn, refuses to drop through platforms to reach them, and either outright refuses to jump or uses its jumps very poorly. You can see this very clearly by summoning a clone and having it follow a player standing still on a platform, especially near a ledge. Sometimes it simply gets stuck, whether that be from something like Krag's stage elements or the AI just bugging out. Superclone is somehow even more stupid. It seems to be more prone to random suicide because it keeps auto-attacking, even while recovering or running away while the opponent is respawning. I see these clone problems happen a lot personally. The best player and my best friend in my local scene play Forsburn, and normally the clone will cross me up and it looks like it's trying to just like dash dance around me, right? However, what that leads to is if I dash forwards or backwards and they pop the clone, a lot of times the clone will just miss me, even though it probably should have hit if the clone is properly tracking me. There's a few changes that have been fixed, but let's talk about Superclone now. Superclone should be teleported to the player on special getup, rather than be destroyed. Sacrificing a superclone is essentially never worth a special getup. Teleporting it to a special getup would be a quality of life feature at worst, and yet another piece of skill expression for an underutilized part of his kit at best. I think this would be super sick. It would kind of give like an ice climbers, like depending on how you upbeat, you can kind of save Nana type idea. Teleporting to a smoke cloud has vastly different outcomes depending on where the cloud intersects with the ground, as well as whether you're touching the ground or are above a platform when the initial teleport ends. It also applies the 4-frame land animation if you end the teleport in the air, but leaves you instantly actionable if you're touching the ground. This is awkward enough when dealing with a single cloud, but multiple clouds or moving platforms would compound the issue even further. The fact that your character is invisible during all of this means it can be extremely difficult to tell if you're going to end up and what state you'll be in. This video shows how wildly the smoke teleport can vary based on the tiny deviations in smoke height or teleport locations. So really quickly, as you can see, Forsburn's in different active states here, and it's definitely like pretty annoying because I've had my friend go through this too, where landing in different ways will change how often Forsburn's actionable and how he can actually attack and defend himself out of his recovery. I think they should probably find some kind of middle ground, maybe give him like a 2-frame cooldown or like no cooldown, right, if he does teleport into smoke, since teleporting into smoke should be rewarding. This next point has been partially addressed by making the hurt box smaller, though I do think it could use some Rivals 1 mechanics, so I'm leaving this here. Smoke is far too brittle because it has no invulnerability as it spawns. This is very obvious on Smoke that the clone immediately summons on death, with the same move that killed the clone frequently also destroying the Smoke as well. The way Neutral Beat consistently works is drastically worse than Rivals 1. Pre-patch, Forsburn was visible while placing Smoke down, since the Smoke was placed and activated all at once. While not activated, the Smoke was intangible and couldn't be cleared. In Rivals 1, each Smoke is placed and then activated after a set time, staggering the smoke activation, allowing Forsburn to effectively turn invisible faster, while also allowing the opponent to clear the smoke sooner. In Rivals 2, it uses the pre-patch system, but the smoke is vulnerable even while inactive. This means that not only does it take a long time for him to use the smoke after activating it, but the opponent can clear it immediately, which makes the move feel way easier to invalidate. Making smoke work this way definitely skews the closer balance change to the quality of life or bug fix, but I believe it belongs here thanks to the Rivals 1 precedent. I agree with this. I think that the idea that smoke takes a minute to set, but then also has some invulnerability before it sets is pretty good. I think that, truthfully, smoke should be a little bit stronger and easier to use. However, you shouldn't receive, tons of gameplay based around just smoke. You should still be encouraged to approach. So I feel like if smoke was too good, right, then maybe Forsburn would become a bit too campy, potentially. So I think that changing it to similarly to how it is in Rivals 1 would be a good in-between. In a very similar vein, Superclone is also far too brittle. Unlike in Rivals 1, Superclone has no projectile armor, making it completely trivial to destroy in many matchups. Additionally, Rivals 2 has made it far easier to destroy it without projectiles, thanks to the invincible get-up attacks and ledges. These are the main issues that I can think of, but in the comments I'll add any more, and that I see or that people mention. I think that Superclone at ledges is just going to be something that's always going to be a little bit bad. I think that maybe if there's an input, like if you could press B and shield at the same time to make Superclone back off, that would be kind of interesting. Normally with normal clone, you just click B to make Superclone run away from your opponent, or B to run towards them if you've already pressed B once. So giving Superclone maybe an option like that if he doesn't have one already. Truthfully, I'm not super familiar with Forsburn's inputs and things like that on a more technical level because I only dabble in him. But I do know a lot about him because I fight Forsburn very, very frequently. So I think giving him some kind of tool like that to give the player some control, okay, Superclone's not going to run at my opponent at the ledge and then get boomed from an invincible move. That would be pretty interesting. Finally, to wrap us up today with a fun suggestion, this poster says, add support for up to 8 players. Patch 1.3.2 added support for 8-player lobbies, but it's still only possible to play with 4 players maximum. In my opinion, being able to have at least the option to play 8 players should be a big priority. Not only would it bring Rivals closer to its biggest competitor, Smash Bros., it would also allow the game as a whole to become way more attractive as a party game, especially considering Workshop is around the corner, and 8-player support would be an equally as exciting step. In my knowledge, making the UI support 8 players was the hardest part, and now that it's implemented, there are only a few tasks left in order to actually make 8 players a gameplay thing. The big one being to make the servers and netcode allow it. I don't know the implementations, but to my knowledge, it wouldn't be the most difficult task to implement. If the game already supports up to 4 players, it surely wouldn't be too difficult to increase all the variables that would allow 4 players to be increased to 8. And now that lobbies support up to 8 players watching the game, surely servers would be able to handle 8 players playing the game. The other big remaining things are not required, but would certainly help, making 8-player gameplay be a little better. Their first one is to improve performance. It's not a requirement since 8-player gameplay would be optional, of course, but in order to make it smoother to play on any system, performance would probably need to be improved down the line. The second task would be to add some larger maps that would be suited for 8 players. Currently, none of the maps are suited for 8 players, and this would be, again, not a requirement, but certainly help the gameplay experience while we're playing with 8 players. Thank you for reading. There are some double stages that I feel like are pretty big, and you can kind of just stretch those out a bit. But I think this would be such a fun feature, especially as what they mentioned with Workshop. I feel like playing 8-player Smash in couch co-op or even online with friends. I don't think you could play it actually online. But playing 8-player Smash couch co-op, right, was some of the most fun I had with Smash because it's so chaotic and crazy, right? It's not necessarily the best player always winning. It's maybe the player who does something a little wacky, maybe they camp a little bit. That's the players that win, and I feel like it kind of shakes up the game and how you really play it whenever you play it in a free-for-all mode like this. I also think doing teams where it's 4 teams and 2v2v2v2, that's very fun as well, so I would love to see some kind of feature like this. Add maybe a more casual mode, but it's not just casual to the same degree as free-for-all, it's hardcore, wow, this is crazy casual type mode. I think it'd be a lot of fun to see. With that being said though, that just about wraps up today's video. Thanks so much for watching until the end, and like I mentioned earlier, if you want to be featured in some upcoming videos, check out those Google form links in the description down below, and give me some tips for your main, as well as letting me know who you think the most fun characters are to fight against. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye for now.